Welcome everyone to another video meditation and music presentation here at First Presbyterian Church in Natchez. John Gates and I are in the sanctuary. I'm Joan, Gandy, minister here. John is our organist and music director. So glad to welcome you to another video presentation. This morning I ask you to look with me at a very short parable in Matthew 13, which we'll read a little later, and selected verses from the book of Joshua. We're going to read from chapters 1 through 4. And as we look at Joshua together, we will see this new leader emerging. You know, Moses is gone now as Joshua opens, as the book opens. We've just left Deuteronomy. So we're starting into the history books. And so we see God giving blessing and encouragement to this new leader, Joshua. And we see the people also receiving blessing and encouragement from God. And we'll be in the midst with them of a new era for the people of Israel. They finally are leaving the wilderness area to cross the Jordan River to go into the promised land. Moses did not get to accompany them. You remember, it's now the new leader, and in truth, a new kind of people, probably the third generation since the people started out, before the 40 years finally passed. So the first way we might read these chapters in Joshua is to place ourselves on the side of Joshua, with Joshua, walking with him, feeling as he must have felt as a new leader, or just how the people must have felt. We could put ourselves in the midst of this horde of people who will cross together. They must have been very excited, although many of them really didn't have the background that the first generation had as they started out from Egypt and lived in the wilderness the first 10 or 15 years. The story, though, although Joshua is the centerpiece and the people are gathered all around him, and there are many adventures in this book, in the whole book, many adventures, this story is more about God than it is anything else. It's about God's faithfulness, even as the people continually disobey God, and it is about God as he sees his people, loves them, and always offers them mercy and grace. These people are called to be a special representative in the world for God. And God is trying to teach them to be just that. Has never stopped since he called them as a people. And so he's not stopping now. Let's read together now from chapter 1 in Joshua. First we'll read verses 7 through 10. Joshua 1, 7 through 10. Hear the word of the Lord. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to act in accordance with all the law that my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, so that you may be successful wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to act in accordance with all that is written in it. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall be successful. I hereby command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now these words are directed, of course, to Joshua. God is ordaining him, blessing him, setting him up for this leadership role that he has. God has assured Joshua then in these words, even commanded him to be courageous and not to fear. God also reminds Joshua about the importance of the law that has already been given through Moses to the people. Keeping the law in the forefront is something that is important to God, and God commands that Joshua do that as well, saying, do not let it depart out of your mouth, and meditate on it day and night. Those are very specific guidelines for Joshua as a leader of the people. In other words, he's not to be just a leader like the captain of a ship or the general of an army. Joshua is to be the spiritual leader of this people. Joshua speaks to the people after his encounter with God and his blessing from God, and he tells them it's time to cross the river. He gives them instructions as he's been given, and they promise to obey. The crossing is to take 3 days, but first there's an interesting story if you'd like to read it in chapter 2. There's a foray by some of the people across the river into the land, just to see what's going on there. Very interesting story, and you might want to read that sometime today. The story of the crossing begins, and the priests would carry the Ark of the Covenant across the river. The people would cross. And after the crossing, 12 people, one from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, would pick up a large stone from the riverbed of the Jordan River, which God had cut off so that the people could cross. They would pick up the stone, and God's first instruction was, just put the stones in the place where you're going to camp. And now let's read from chapter 4. We'll read verses 1 to 3 from chapter 4 of Joshua. When the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood. Carry them over with you and lay them down in the place where you camp tonight. And of course, Joshua carried out those instructions. The 12 stones were selected and brought to the other side, and the priests then left the middle of the riverbed and came to the new place. And then God explains what the stones are to represent. We're going to jump over to verses 19 in chapter 4, verses 19 to 24. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. Those 12 stones which they had taken out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal, saying to the Israelites, when your children ask their parents in time to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know, Israel crossed over the Jordan here on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we crossed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. The new place would be a place where common memories would be made. Memories of the goodness and the greatness of God would live on into the future because of these instructions that the people were given, and Joshua saw to it that they carried them out. The gracious mercy of God would be passed on to future generations through the story told by those stones taken out of the river. Reading the story, I find many different roads leading into it and out of it, but there is a common thread, and that is God's faithfulness, God's power, and God's glory. God accomplished this deed for the people, giving them the new place to live as promised so long ago, and the new monument to build, all to be done to the glory of God. And here is where I think the short parable in Matthew 13 might be a good way to wrap up this short meditation and study. God does not give up on the people, even though he does become angry because of their unfaithfulness. He does regret some of the poor decisions that they make. He does not delight in the evil in the world, but he promises to be ever present and always doing new things in the world. He promises grace. Now, the parable I'm going to read, very short, the end of Matthew 13, verses 51 to 52. First, Jesus asks the disciples after a long litany of parables in chapter 13, "Have you understand all this?" They answer, "Yes." And he said to them, "Therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like the master of a household, who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old." As people seeking God and God's way, seeking to glorify God and to give all honor and praise to him, we find strength in the new things God does in our life and the life of the church in the world. But we know that from eons ago, from the beginning of time, God has been on a true course, a way in which he wants to lead all people on a level path that ends in love and praise. This is where we can find the old and the new coming together for us today, just as it did in the time of those people crossing the river that day. Where the people of Israel found it long ago, that is where we find it, where God has always been immortal, invisible, God, only wise.